Good evening and welcome to Mining the Riches of the Parsha. It is such a great pleasure to be with you tonight. Tonight is Thursday night, June 1st, 2023. I've been looking forward to this all week, and I am so grateful to every single one of you for being here tonight. I want to start with a great only in Israel story. A person should have a collection of only in Israel stories, and this should be a part of the collection. So it happened a couple years ago, and it happened at the Beitar Elite Planning and Building Committee. Not exactly where you would think something inspiring would happen, but it did. There was a dispute, which is not unusual. That's really what the committee is about disputes. Planning and Building Committee, there was a dispute. A resident of Beitar applied to build an addition to his apartment. One of his neighbors submitted an opposition to the application because the addition to this fellow's apartment would block the sunlight to one of the rooms in her apartment. Now, the truth is, it's quite a common case. You may remember there was a similar case in Westmount a few years ago. Someone wanted to build a house, but it was going to block someone's view. Actually, the Talmud discusses this situation. To what extent do I have the right to do something on my property that impinges on the usability of your property? So the Talmud discusses it in my law course. I raise this subject when I'm teaching. All right. So, but in any event, the neighbor with the apartment who wanted the addition, he really wanted this addition. And so he said, well, I'll pay you. He said to this woman, I'll make a sizable financial compensation for the fact that I'll be blocking part of your sunlight. So the two of them go off to a side room to negotiate this issue. And they're talking and they're discussing. And the woman says, finally, she says, I tell you what, I would be willing to remove my opposition to your application on one condition: that you begin learning daf-yomi. If you start studying Talmud 2 pages a day, it takes 7.5 years to finish the entire Talmud. If you study daf-yomi for the entire 7.5 years, I'll let you build your addition. But there was a problem. The problem is that this man was already learning daf-yomi. But what he was willing to do is he was willing to dedicate his learning of daf-yomi to this woman during the 7.5 years that it would take him to complete all of Shas. City engineer Avishai Meron said, I've been on the committee for 14 years, and I've never encountered such an unusual negotiation. So this made the news in Israel, as you might imagine. And the woman told the reporter who spoke to her, she said she was thinking about the financial offer that he had made. And one day she was just looking at her apartment and looking at the room that was going to be blocked because of his addition. And she said to herself, he offered me this money, but you know what? Money comes, money goes. I want something eternal. I want something that'll last. If I'm going to give up the sunlight, I want something to show for it. And she said to herself, for the next 7.5 years, I will be able to look at that room and there's less sunlight and I will know that I am receiving something eternal in exchange for what I have given up. One of the committee members said to the reporter, they said, in most cases, disputes are solved with financial compensation. But I believe this is the only case in the history of the Beitar Elite Planning and Building Committee that was solved in a spiritual manner. I just want to add one thing, and I'll come to you, Marilyn. It's an amazing lesson. First of all, it's a really important lesson about negotiation, because anytime we are in a difficult negotiation, you can solve it once both people can figure out what each of them really wants. And that's really the key to a successful negotiation, is to find out not what the person says they want, but to figure out what they actually really want. Once you get to that level, then you're going to be able to solve that negotiation. And just one last thing, you can tell a lot about a person when you get to the level of what do they really want. It's extremely revealing. And I think this is something that would only happen in Israel. Yes, Marilyn?
Was the woman going to give him permission before the 7.5 years, before he dedicated either the money?
Well, I guess she was going to trust him that he would stick to it. I guess that was the arrangement.
If it had been a financial compensation, she would have...
It would have been clear she was willing to take that risk, I guess. Because the money didn't matter to her.
No.
What mattered to her is that she would be getting something of spiritual nature. Okay. Confession to make. Yesterday, I made a mistake. No one died, but I was negligent in something, and it caused another person some difficulty. I wish I could say that this is newsworthy, but it's not. I agree with Hugh Prather, who wrote, I have the choice of being right or being human. So that's the choice that I make. I'm human. I make mistakes. But it got me to thinking about a famous letter that was written by Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner. He was criticizing the way in which in certain parts of the Jewish world, books are written about great Jewish scholars, leaders. And there's a style of these writings, there's a word for it called hagiography, where they're brilliant, they're perfect. The Chavetz Chaim never said an evil word in his life. Rav Moshe Feinstein knew all of the Talmud when he was 3 years old. This painting a picture of just perfection and not to say anything realistic or, God forbid, negative, but just, as what I would call, and what Rav Hutner would call, a misguided sense of respect, of honor, just to say, how amazing and wonderful, and never had a temptation and never made a mistake. And Rav Hutner says that that's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing for two reasons. Number one, it's not true. The Chavetz Chaim, who wrote literally the textbook on not speaking negative speech, not speaking Lashon Hara, he spoke Lashon Hara. He did. It happened. Not once. And he grew from it. And he learned from that experience. So the first reason that this kind of literature is so harmful is because it's not true. And falsehood, even in the pursuit of a holy goal, is wrong. If you think that you're building up a respect for Torah, respect for Judaism, by saying things that are not true. No, you're not. You should not be doing that. That's number one. And number two, when we do this, we create a situation where it is impossible for any of us to learn from that person. It's impossible to have a role model if the role model never ever makes a mistake, because who could ever be like that? Who could ever be like the Chavetz Chaim, who never in his life spoke gossip? It's not possible. Of course, it's also not true, but it's not possible. It removes the ability to learn from someone because it removes them from our experience. There's a famous verse in Mishlei, in Proverbs. Ki sheva yipol tzadik v'kam. A person, a righteous person, a tzaddik, a righteous person, falls 7 times and rises. So there's a simple explanation for this. It's given by the famous Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. And he said that, it's an important lesson. A tzaddik, a righteous person, even if they fall, they get up. Levi Yitzchak said, there are 3 things you can learn from watching a baby. When he cries, he calls his father. He's always busy. And when he falls, he gets up. Those are important lessons. Those are good traits that we all need to learn. But a number of our scholars explain that that's not really what the verse means. The Baal Shem Tov says this. Rav Tzadok HaKohen says this. Ki shiva yipol tzaddik v'kam does not simply mean a tzaddik falls 7 times but rises. Rather, ki sheva yipol tzaddik, it is because of falling 7 times that one is able to rise to the level of becoming a tzaddik.
Where do we get the figure 7?
Sheva.
But why 7, not 9, not 10?
Shlomo HaMelech, he wrote it. Ask him. Next time you talk to him, you'll ask him, and please tell me what he says.
Maybe I'll tell you.
Okay, you'll think about it. But that's what he said. What makes a person into a tzaddik, a righteous person, is having fallen, having been tempted, facing challenges, facing down periods, and recovering from them. That is how a person becomes a tzaddik. When I was a kid, in my home, one of the heroes in my family was Joe DiMaggio. You may need to be a certain age to remember. And he was actually before my time, but he was a very famous baseball player. And my father was a big fan of Joe DiMaggio. And so growing up as a child, I heard a lot about Joe DiMaggio. Joe DiMaggio was an amazing baseball player. In 1941, Joe DiMaggio hit a base hit in 56 consecutive games. Now, that was a record in 1941, and that record stands today. That record has never been beaten. A baseball hit in 56 consecutive baseball games since 1941. It started early in the summer of that season, May 15th, 1941. If you are into baseball, you may know about that. Less well known is the fact that the beginning of that season, up until the beginning of the streak on May 15th, the first part of the season was the worst slump of his entire career. The first part of the season, up until May 15th, his batting average was 194. If you don't play baseball, let me just say, I could almost hit 194, and I can't hit a baseball. From May 15th to July 16th, his batting average was 408. It's astounding. That's heroism. To go through the worst period of life and somehow use that experience to respond with the world record that still stands. And it is possible that he learned this lesson from this week's Torah portion. Could be. Because this week's Parsha is the Torah portion of Nasso. And our Parsha describes in excruciating, repetitious detail the gifts of the Nisim. There were 12 princes, the head of each of the 12 tribes. Each one of them gave a series of gifts in honor of the dedication of the Mishkan, of the sanctuary, when it was finally built and put into usage. So each one of these princes brought numerous gifts on successive days, one after the other. Each prince's gift was identical to the others. And the Torah, instead of just saying, this is what the first one brought on the first day, and on the second day, he brought the same thing, and on the third day, the same thing, what the Torah says is, the Torah records each one of those gifts in detail, one after the other, making this the longest single Torah portion of the entire Torah. Simply because it keeps repeating this long paragraph over and over again, 12 times. Why so much attention to these gifts? Why not present it in a more succinct and efficient manner? So there are a number of answers to this question. One that I want to share with you is based on a comment that Rashi makes earlier in the Torah in the book of Shmos. When the Mishkan was being built, remember this was this grand project after God had forgiven the Jewish people for the golden calf and then commanded the Mishkan, and everyone's bringing material and everyone is donating items and making things. And there was a call. Each person should bring what they have. They needed gold and silver and copper and the other materials and precious stones. And when this appeal went out, the Nisim, the princes of each tribe, they said, here's what they said. They said, let the people bring as much as they're going to bring, and whatever is left over, we'll make up the difference. We'll cover the shortfall. Now, I have to tell you, if anybody would be willing to do that for ADATH, we would be very happy to accept that gift. And I promise we would be very complimentary and giving of honor to such a person who would like to give such a gift, and you can discuss it with me after the class. Take another cholent first, and then we'll discuss it, but it would be my pleasure. The problem was that the people brought more than was needed. And there was nothing left for the Nisim to give. And they felt terrible. They felt humiliated because they had been lackadaisical. So when the time came to dedicate this building, they didn't wait. This time, when the dedication came, they were first in line. They were the first to donate the gifts that would be given. And this is the key to greatness. It's not just, look, I have an opportunity to correct a mistake I made. I made a mistake. Now I can correct it. That's a good thing. But that's ordinary. Greatness, excellence, comes at the moment of the mistake. At the moment of letdown, at the moment of defeat, to say to yourself, this is not a defeat. If I use it to plan now, to look for the opportunity in the future to be better. It's a subtle difference, but it's a crucial difference. It's the key to greatness. It's the recognition that the moment a challenge looms, it holds the promise of growth. It's a different way of looking at the world, and it's a different way of looking at our lives. And if you do that, when you do that, you will be a prince or a princess. Kisheva yipol tzadik v'kam. Falling is what helps create a person to become a tzaddik. It's not possible to avoid making mistakes in life. Leadership, greatness, excellence comes from having honesty, the honesty to learn from and to grow from our mistakes. And that's why we savor each verse of this very long Torah portion. Because every word of this repetition, every word that we read over and over again 12 times is a gift. In fact, it's a gift to us in how to navigate life, in how to look at life, to use everything that happens to us to help us grow. And so I feel fortunate to have made so many mistakes, and I promise that I will continue to do so.
My wife points out.
Okay, so you have help.
That's right. I feel like I have a living life coach.
So, as we just discussed, the reading in the Torah portion this week is so repetitious, page after page. The gifts brought by each of the 12 princes, the Nesiim. And each day, the gift is identical. It's the exact same list of items that were brought. Each of the 12 paragraphs is identical, except for the day and the name and the tribe, meaning the person who's bringing the gift. So, for example, Bayom HaShlishi, Nasi Livnei Zvulun, Eliyav ben Chelon. On the third day of this 12-day period of dedication, the prince of the tribe of Zevulun was Eliyav ben Chelon, and this is the gift that he brought. And then it lists all the gifts that he brought. B'yom Haravi, on the fourth day, Nasi Livnei Reuven, the prince of the tribe of Reuven, Elitzur ben Shneur. And that's the list of the gifts that he brought. Same formula, identical for everyone. Day, title, name, identical, with one exception. One discrepancy. Bayom Harishon, on the first day, Nachshon ben Aminadav Lamate Yehuda. Nachshon, the son of Aminadav, from the tribe of Yehuda. What's the difference? What's missing? There's no title. Nachshon, from the tribe of, doesn't see Nasi. No title. You remember just a few weeks ago, the dramatic scene that we read about on the seventh day of Pesach, when the Jewish people are running from Egypt and the Egyptian army is catching up with them, and there's the sea in front of them, and the people are afraid, and Nachshon ben Aminadav jumps into the water, and the water splits miraculously, and the Jewish people are able to walk through on dry land, and then the water comes back and drowns all of the Egyptian soldiers. The entire Jewish people is led to safety because of the courage and leadership of this man, one man, Nachshon. Even today, over 3,000 years later, he is a role model for all of us to face our ocean, to face our deepest fear, and to lead by example. But there is one more critical component that Nachshon teaches us about leadership, and that's the lesson that comes from our Torah portion. B'yom harishon Nachshon ben Aminadav l'matei Yehuda. Why is his title not used? So I want to share with you the answer given by Rav Shlomo Gansfried. He says as follows: titles and respect for what the titles represent are important. A person should take pride in their accomplishments, especially when they require extraordinary effort and diligence. 11 leaders, 11 princes use their title legitimately. And we would not know that they are leaders without having their title there, because those 11, we don't know their names from any other place in the Torah. This is the only time these names are mentioned. But here's the key. Real leaders don't need titles. Nachshon did not need to be called a prince because his actions spoke louder than any title. His actions announced his greatness. General George Marshall was a great general in the United States Army. And he once said, he was talking about politics. He once said, there's no limit to what you can accomplish in politics as long as you do not care who gets credit. I would extend that to life. There's no limit to what you can accomplish in life as long as you do not care who gets credit. To be courageous, to accomplish great things and not have an inflated ego, not feel that it's about me, but about the work that I do and the people that I serve. Only 1 out of the 12 was on that level. Only Nachshon. No title was needed. And that is the kind of leadership towards which we should try to aspire. Allow me to share one more piece for tonight. So on Shavuos, we learned, we heard, we experienced the Aseret Dibros. God spoke to the entire Jewish people the 10 Commandments. Of course, you remember we read that passage earlier during the winter in the Parsha of Yisro, and the Aseret Dibros is also included later in the Parsha of Eschanan in the summer. And I'm sure you know that although it's the same text of God speaking to the entire Jewish people, it's the same event, there are some slight discrepancies between the text as recorded in the Parsha of Yisro versus in the Parsha of Eschanan. One of them, famously, is in the mitzvah of Shabbos, whereas on Shavuos, when we read from the Parsha of Yisro, we introduced that mitzvah of Zachar es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. In Veschanan, the pasuk says, Shamar es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, guard or protect the Shabbos day to keep it holy. We understand that there is no inconsistency. Rather, as we say in the Friday night davening in L'Chadodi, Shamar v'Zachar b'dibor echad. We say this in the poem of L'Chadodi, that God was able to do something that a human being is not able to do. God spoke two words at the same time. Since a human being is not able to do that, in one place it's written with one of the words, in the other place it's written with the second word, but both of the words were actually spoken together. In other words, the idea is that there are two elements. There is a dual nature to Shabbos. There is an element or a layer or a component of Shabbos that relates to Zachar, and then another element or layer or component that relates to Shamar. There are many ways to understand this dichotomy of remembering Shabbos and guarding Shabbos. One of them is that Shamar, to guard or protect Shabbos, refers to the details of observance. I don't do this, I don't do that. There are 39 categories of activity and rabbinic laws, things that I do not do in order to protect or guard the sanctity of Shabbos. Zachar, to remember, is the spirituality, the positive actions that I do, the ways in which I feel and express the holiness of the day. Now, of course, the point is, Shamar v'Zachar b'dibor echad, that each one leads to the other. They have to be connected, of course. Every Friday night, before Mariv, in most congregations, Jews say a passage relating to Shabbos. And there are two different customs of what that passage is. One custom is Bame Madlikin, which is what we here at ADATH say, and most Ashkenazic shuls say Bame Madlikin. It's not actually a prayer at all. It's actually a chapter of Mishnah. And Bame Madlikin literally means, with what may we kindle the Shabbos lights. It is a review of the laws of lighting Shabbos candles, because it happens Friday evening just as Shabbos is about to start. So we study the laws about lighting Shabbos candles and other laws that relate to the beginning of Shabbos. Okay? There's a second custom. Many in the Sephardic world and the Hasidic world have, to say a different prayer, a prayer that it starts with the words Kegavna. The Rav Soloveitchik, said that this prayer, Kegavna, is the highest expression of the essence of Shabbos in all of Jewish liturgy. Kegavna di'inun misyachadin le'ela be'echad, just as they in heaven above unite into oneness, of hachi ihi ischadas lesata beraza de'echad, so the Sabbath on earth below joins the mystery of oneness. Raza de Shabbos, the secret of Shabbos, or the mystery of Shabbos, Ihi Shabbos di'isachades beraza de'echad. Shabbos is attached to the mystery of God's oneness. Va'anpa nihirim b'nihiri ilah. The countenance of Shabbos is illuminated with a supernatural light. Vis ateres lesata ba'ama kadisha. And on earth, the Sabbath crowns the holy people. V'chulhon misatrin b'nishmasan chadatin. And all of its holy people, the Jewish people, are endowed with new souls. What a beautiful expression of the mystical nature of Shabbos. Personally, I have a great feeling whenever I say that prayer, and I do not say it often because I usually daven here at ADATH, and we do not say this prayer here at ADATH. Usually I say Bama Malikin. Once in a while, for whatever reason, I will find myself in a place that says Kagavna, and I feel it. That prayer speaks to me. So, we all make use of stereotypes. Human beings need stereotypes because there's too much going on in the world to try to evaluate everything on an individual basis. And there's truth to stereotypes. Of course, we have to be careful not to overuse stereotypes, not to judge things based on stereotypes, but there is a certain truth to stereotypes. There is a stereotype about the difference between Ashkenazim and Sephardim. Ashkenazim are, the stereotype goes, legalistic, focusing on the details, right and wrong. Sephardim are more focused on the spirituality, the feeling, the ecstasy of the moment. Of course, there are exceptions in both directions, but that's a stereotype. The stereotype fits with these two prayers. Because you have Ashkenazim. So how do we mark the beginning of Shabbos? Well, let's review the rules. Here's how you do it. Here's how you light. Here's how you don't light. Here's the checklist, what you have to take care of before Shabbos starts. How does Sephardim start Shabbos? The mystery of oneness, the connection of God, the special soul that we have as this holy day begins. But here's the truth. The truth is we need both. The truth is we need the guarding of desisting from certain kinds of work in order to make room for the spirituality that we are supposed to feel. And if the spirituality that we are striving for is not grounded and based on the halachic principles of what we're not supposed to do, we will not be achieving an authentic spirituality. Both are necessary. But wherever you go to shul, you have to choose. Unless you are Rabbi Yehuda Amital. I've shared many times quotes and stories about this amazing person, Rabbi Yehuda Amital. So, among many other things, but he is perhaps most well known for the fact that he started a yeshiva. It's a yeshiva in Israel called Har Etzion. Today it is one of the most magnificent yeshivos in the world, and it has been so for decades. And when Rav Amital started this yeshiva, he started fresh. Tabula rasa. Which meant he had the opportunity to decide all of the customs exactly the way he wanted it to be. And Rav Amital instituted in his yeshiva, they say both. Every Friday night, first they say Bama Malikin, then they say Kegavna, and then they daven Marav. Now, Rav Yehuda Amital has very, very broad shoulders. I'm not aware of anywhere else in the world, if anyone knows of another place in the world that says both of the prayers, I'd be interested to hear it. I'm not aware of anywhere else in the world that says both of these prayers. But the concept is certainly true. We need both. We need the details, and we need the bigger picture, the spirituality. We need the shamar, and we need the zachar, and it's got to be connected. I don't feel that I, on my own, have the authority to make that change here at ADATH, but I always thought to myself, if I was ever involved in a merger between an Ashkenaz shul and a Sephardic congregation, wouldn't that be a great idea to institute saying both of those prayers? But certainly, when considering an activity on Shabbos, when considering how we should be spending our time on Shabbos, this should be the two-part test of whether a certain action or activity is appropriate. Number one, is it in accordance with the rules of Shabbos? Is it in accord with Shamar? And number two, does it lead to greater holiness? Is it a fulfillment of Zachar? Regardless of which prayer we say, the balance between the two must be our goal for experiencing Shabbos. My friends, I want to wish you a great night. Thank you so much for being here. I wish you a fantastic Shabbos. And I look forward to seeing all of you soon in person. And I would love to have any questions you have. Yes?